Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar, Are You Driving Dangerously in Virginia? The Insider's Guide to Insurance. My name is Amy Bradley, and I'm a lawyer licensed in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. I'm a partner with the law firm of Briglia, Hundley, PC in Tysons Corner, Virginia. The purpose of today's webinar is to give Virginia drivers information about what kind of coverage they should have and some very important changes that are happening in Virginia laws that are going to be impacting drivers fairly significantly. As a disclaimer, this webinar is not intended to give legal advice, and anyone that is needing legal advice should certainly consult individually with an attorney. I am so excited today to introduce Katherine Ivey. She is an insurance broker licensed in Virginia, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and West Virginia. And Katherine is the Director of Operations for Legacy Insurance Group. It is a pleasure to have you here, Katherine. And thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for the warm introduction, and I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're going to dive right into this. And so I think let's start with just some basics. Let's get some terminology and definitions out there. Katherine, what is liability insurance?
Sure. So liability insurance is simply what you as an individual would be liable for if you cause high limits of liability. So there's a lot of hidden costs besides the extent of medical expenses like lost wages, pain and suffering, other costs associated with those injuries. And when added up, the damages can exceed what most people are carrying on their insurance policy.
So that leads us into a good question. How much bodily insurance coverage should I be carrying?
No less than $500,000 on any given accident. So this will be able to satisfy the basic requirements to qualify for umbrella insurance, which would be a representation of your net worth. Normally, we'll start off with a $1 million policy, which will be beyond the $500,000 underlying policy. And I'm sure when you heard $1 million worth of coverage that you're wondering how much through the roof that premium will be. However, the cost will really depend on the number of assets that we're insuring. So number of vehicles, number of properties, if there are any youthful drivers in the household. So it will only be anywhere between $10 and $30 a month. So you'll really see pennies on the dollar a day, and you'll be able to obtain top-notch coverage that will keep you out of a legal jam and really protect your assets.
The numbers are so surprising that you can get that kind of coverage for just really not that much money. And I think that people, it's really their lack of understanding of insurance and why they need it, which causes a lot of drivers to be underinsured. Do you think that's correct?
I would 100% agree. And a lot of the times when people even hear the word insurance, they're kind of just think to themselves, oh, that's something that I have to have, so I'll just get it because I have to have it. However, when you actually learn what these actual policies and coverages are all about, it makes sense. And you know, especially for that umbrella policy, $1 million worth of excess liability coverage, it's a no-brainer. $10 to $30 a month, it just makes sense.
And so when people are thinking about insurance, they might say liability coverage. And so just to put that into like super layman's terms, that's basically just if I hurt someone else, or if someone else is hurt by my actions or inactions, what kind of coverage is available to you? And so that's just like the easiest way, I think, to think about liability, because it sounds scary, but really it's just, what if I accidentally hurt someone? Is that fair?
Absolutely. And that is exactly what insurance is. It's there to protect you if an accident were to happen. It's there to protect you against those unforeseen occurrences.
And so, Katherine, there's been like a huge change in Virginia. And I should say there's about to be a huge change because on July 1st of 2021, the limits of the general district court are going up in Virginia. And so before, a person could only be sued for $25,000 in the general district courts in Virginia. That's the lower level court. And now, as of July 1st, 2021, people can be sued for up to $50,000 if they're involved in an automobile accident that injures someone. And that's a pretty big change in Virginia because those jurisdictional limits, that number of $25,000 has remained the same for a really long time. And you probably noticed, Katherine, that number is the same number that, is the minimum limits in Virginia of $25,000. So let me ask you, why is the state minimum insurance in Virginia of $25,000? Why is that not sufficient?
Gosh, that's a great question. So I would say that state minimum insurance is not acceptable for anybody. Not even if you're single, if you're renting, even if you have what you would consider an older vehicle, anyone that operates a motor vehicle can be liable. And $25,000, even $50,000 is not going to be sufficient in any accident.
That's a very good point. And one of the things that Katherine is alluding to is that when a person gets injured in an automobile accident, the medical bills can add up very, very quickly. And in Virginia, if you are at fault and you injure someone else, you're actually responsible to pay those bills dollar for dollar if the injuries are related to the automobile accident. And so, and people say, well, what about health insurance? What if health insurance pays some of the people's bills? It doesn't matter in Virginia. Our law is such that the General Assembly has decided that they would rather people be not punished for having health insurance, but rather rewarded for having health insurance. And so basically what happens is if a person goes to the doctor and that bill is $10,000, which I know sounds like a lot, but when you start going to multiple visits to any specific provider, or if you end up hurting someone to the point where they have like a broken bone, that 10,000, 20,000. I mean, I've got cases with hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills can add up extremely quickly. And so we really just want to make sure that we are explaining why it matters that the general district court limits are going up, but the insurance policies for a time being are not. And that actually brings me to my next point, that the minimum limits right now are 25,000, as Katherine was discussing. And they are not going up in Virginia. It's, this is one of those things where it's just a slow reaction, but they are not going up until January 1st of 2022 to match the increase in the limits of that general district court. And so there's going to be a gap in time where potentially a lot of people who have minimum insurance are going to be looking at excess exposure in Virginia courts. And so what I mean by excess exposure is that your personal assets may be on the line. And so it's a difficult situation, and you don't want to end up in that situation. Isn't that true, Katherine?
Yes, I mean, certainly. I completely 100% hands down agree. If a Virginia driver gets sued for causing an accident, will they have to hire their own attorney?
That's a really good question, Katherine. So usually if you have insurance in Virginia, you are going to get an attorney assigned to you through your insurance company. The insurance companies in Virginia have what's called a duty to defend you. So if you get sued, you will get an attorney. However, and this is where it gets a little tricky, when you have that insurance attorney, they're probably going to tell you that if you have any excess exposure, that you may need to go out and hire your own attorney because their job is to defend you. But there is a bit of I wouldn't even say it's a conflict of interest, but there is they are working also for the insurance company. And so you have to always keep in mind, like, are they looking out for the policy and what the limits of the policy are? Or are they looking out for your personal assets? They cannot give you advice on what you should be doing with your personal assets. And so a lot of times they will send a letter that says you have personal exposure in this case and you should consider hiring your own attorney. And so that's an additional cost, which again makes it all the more worthwhile to pay those $30, $40 a month premiums that Katherine was talking about to make sure that you have adequate coverage, so you don't end up in that situation. Katherine, one of the questions that a lot of clients ask me is, what other kinds of coverage should I be looking at? What do I need?
Sure. So again, I would highly recommend getting the umbrella policy in place. We could start off with a $1 million policy of excess liability coverage. And again, the way that that umbrella policy will work is it's really going to act as if it is an umbrella on top of your underlying policies. So that umbrella policy will be on top of your auto and your home, your condo, your renter's insurance policy, whichever your underlying policies are. And it will be able to be used once the underlying policies are exhausted. So say for instance, if you do have children, I would certainly recommend to have this umbrella policy in place if your child were to have a birthday party at your home and one of the guests were to be injured and you were held liable. Even in this area, day and age, $500,000 isn't necessarily going to cover everything that may be needed to recover somebody from hospital bills, lawyer fees, and so on. So this umbrella policy is going to be very important to have in place. Also, if you have youthful drivers in your home, if you have, again, multiple properties, multiple vehicles, you just want to make sure that you're protecting your assets. So this umbrella policy, again, is going to be super, super important to have in place.
Great advice. Let me ask another question. I think you have sort of alluded to this and answered this in part, but are there any other things that would make someone or a household perhaps a higher risk?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Again, if you have a youthful driver or any age child under the age of 18, I would highly recommend to have that umbrella policy in place, even college-aged newer drivers. And if you have a trampoline at your home, if you have a swimming pool in your backyard, I would certainly recommend that you are a bit of what we call the higher risk, which just means that you have more to protect. So we want to make sure that you do have that proper coverage in place.
And so Katherine was talking about that umbrella policy, and I just wanted to kind of chime in here just a little bit on that as well. I always explain to the clients that the umbrella is literally, think of it as an umbrella over your head. And so you're holding all these packages that are your liability insurance. So you might have your homeowner's insurance here, and then you have your automobile insurance here. But if any of if ever you were to injure someone and they were to come after you and sue you in court, not only then do you have the packages that you're holding in your hand, but you also have this umbrella that is over you, and it's like a shield almost. And it's saying, even if this isn't enough coverage, what you've got in your hands, this policy is going to kick in and cover you in like the event of a terrible rainstorm if you catastrophically injure someone. And one thing I will say about Katherine, I recently was able to get better insurance through Katherine because I had a underinsured motorist coverage on my automobile insurance. And then I also had an umbrella, but my umbrella policy did not cover a situation where I was injured. It only covered if I hurt someone else. And so this is getting into the weeds a bit, but Katherine, when people look at their automobile insurance cards, they're going to see a couple of numbers on there. And this can be very confusing for people because there's a lot of people who don't know what those numbers mean. So can you explain when you see the letters, or maybe it'll say like underinsured and uninsured motorists, and then the numbers and what those limits mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So normally for those limits of liability, you'll typically see bodily injury. And then for a policy such as ours, either on your declaration page or your ID card, normally you'll be seeing 250,000 slash 500,000 and then slash or on a third line item of 100,000. So what that really means is that for the $500,000, you will be protected up to $500,000 in any given accident if you are held liable in an accident that you cause, or if somebody who is uninsured or underinsured. So say for instance, if you, unfortunately, if you were at a stoplight driving and your light just turned green and somebody blew through their red light and T-boned you and then drove away, you could at that point dip into your own uninsured, underinsured motorist policy to submit that claim, make sure that all of the property damage, the medical bills will be included and covered for yourself in that accident. And for the $250,000, so that very first set of numbers that you'll see, that will be if you are liable toward an accident, and that will be per person. So the first line item will be per person, and the second will be per accident. And then the last one, 100,000, will be property damage. So if you are responsible for another person's property damage, then you'll be covered up to $100,000.
Okay. And then the UIM, underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage, that kicks in both if a driver is uninsured, completely doesn't have insurance, and injures you, or if in the case of someone who has less insurance than you. Is that kind of how that works?
Yep, exactly. And that uninsured and underinsured motorist, that will actually reflect what your bodily injury and property damage liability limits are. So they will mirror each other. So if you do get into an accident with somebody who is not insured and they are the one at fault, or if it is a hit and run, then you can still count on your insurance.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously that makes that UM and UIM coverage very important, because I think a lot of people, when they think of insurance, are thinking, well, why would I pay all this money to protect someone else, right? When in reality, it's not just protecting the other person who you might hurt, but it's also protecting yourself if you're injured by someone who is uninsured or underinsured.
Exactly, right.
So what I would recommend to our viewers is, I think because we have this very interesting timing situation going on where I think a lot of people are going to be facing potentially lawsuits in general district courts in Virginia where they are facing excess exposure. So I think it's a great time for people to get in contact with their insurance agents. And if you don't have an insurance agent, you should certainly reach out to Katherine or someone at her group and get more information on what kind of limits you should have. They will take you through a questionnaire about what kind of assets you have and work with you closely to make sure that you have the proper amount of coverage. And so, Katherine, it has definitely been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today. Are there any last words that you want to impart with our viewers?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for having me, Amy. I do want to certainly recommend anybody watching this video, please feel free to reach out to me. It's always important to get your insurance reviewed, even if you've been with the same carrier for 20 years. A fresh pair of eyes is always helpful, no matter the industry. So please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Katherine, and thank you for joining us.